Good morning. Today on Spotlight, the right to vote and a new campaign to promote and make access to voting easier. Should this proposed constitutional amendment be on your November ballot? Carrie Moss and Kalia Spencer will tell us. And later, Frank and Karen Hammer will discuss their coalition's vision for development of the old Michigan State Fairgrounds site. It's Sunday, March the 11th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. Promote the vote campaign. You want to get this on the November ballot. If you get the signatures and you get it on the ballot, then you have to do that by June. But it's November ballot, correct?
November ballot, right? So it's a constitutional amendment that will basically modernize Michigan's election system and make it more accessible for working families to vote. And Michigan is one of the few states in the country that has not kept up with modern reforms, and we hope that through this initiative, this constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in November.
The League of Women Voters is also sort of the third rung in all of this, coalitions that have pulled all this together?
Yeah, so the League of Women Voters, the NAACP, and the ACLU kind of came together to form this coalition. We're building it out. We've got over 70 endorsements, including a lot of other organizations, but I would say the three organizations have been really just trying to get everything in place that you need to do this kind of effort. And as you know, all three organizations have for years worked on voting rights and making sure the right to vote, is something for everybody.
Sure. All right, let's look at the nuts and bolts. You need about 316,000 signatures. You have to collect them by June 30th and then turn them in. You're aiming for about 425,000 to give yourself some cushion for those that are going to get tossed out for one reason or another. And if you meet this deadline, then it's out there for the voters to vote on. How tall of an order is that? That's a lot of signatures in a relatively short period of time.
Do you want to?
It's a tall order, but I think we've got the momentum going. We have over 600 volunteers that have already started taking out petitions and collecting signatures. Our League of Women Voters chapters are getting into the signature gathering, and this weekend the NAACP will be training our branches to start doing petition and signature gathering. So I think it's, it's a tall order.
Signature gathering is volunteers, but also you're paying some people to get signatures? Okay,
so
how much?
How much are we paying them,
yeah,
or how much are signatures? I think we're shooting for half and half. I think that's a lofty goal, but I think we wanted to make sure, given the short timeline, that we did have some people out there making sure that we were supplementing our volunteer base. And so I think it is a tall order, but as we've seen in other initiatives that we've had statewide, it's definitely something that could be met. And I think people really want these reforms.
All right.
We had a really strong reaction when we first launched, and we've had house parties across the state. We've given out at least 5,000 ballots at this point. We've done a lot of training. So we've got a good ground game.
All right. Let's go through some of the nuts and bolts of what exactly this would do if indeed it's passed. Of the various things it'll do, what's the most important?
Well, I really think three are particularly important. The first one is no excuse absentee. Right now, Michigan is one of just a few states that says, you have to be over 60, you have to have a disability, or you have to be away on election day to do no excuse absentee. This would make it possible for anybody to do no excuse absentee, which makes it easier for working families, people with 2 jobs, and gives people more time to really look at a ballot before they vote. So that's the first significant reform. The second is automatic registration. Anytime you go to the Secretary of State to do business, you would be automatically registered unless you opt out. So that would increase the number of people registered to vote. And the third is register anytime, which means that you could literally register anytime up to an election day if you have proof of residency. So you can show you live where you say you do. So those three reforms, if we're successful, would dramatically increase turnout.
This is not going to be the first state that has any of those initiatives, in particular with no reason to absentee. You have 37 other states that have that.
How's that gone for those states?
I think it's gone well, and I think it it increases turnout because it increases the amount of time that you have to vote. A lot of people use that as an opportunity to take the ballot home, mail it in, review, especially if you're looking at ballot initiatives, review the policies, make sure they're more informed about the individual candidates, and it allows people to do more than just walk in and cast your ballot. I think it's also important for our young voters and our transient population to have the opportunity to register anytime, because people move around within the registration period, and we've had multiple calls multiple years about people, they go to a polling location and people are saying your polling location's 50 miles away. People aren't going to have the opportunity to go 50 miles away if they've got 2 jobs. But if you can prove that you live in that polling location or that jurisdiction, it's a lot easier to say, no, I live here. Here's my driver's license or my ID or even, my utility bill. I should be able to vote at that location. And 13 other states have something similar to that reform. So.
All right, we need to take a little break. When we come back, I want to talk about what some of the opposition would be towards what you want to do. We'll be right back. Stay with us. I would imagine that people will say, this is opening up the process too much, and how are you going to control it? And we're just asking for abuse, or we're asking not to be able to control who's voting and make sure that we know exactly what's happening with the process and that the process has integrity to it.
We know from a lot of polling and research that these reforms have support among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. This is not rocket science. These reforms have been adopted in, at least one or more reforms have been adopted in 37 states across the country. Michigan is just simply behind, and so these reforms should not be highly controversial.
Kalia, is this a counterbalance to, we go back to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, there are certain people who believe as though it has been watered down since 1965. Is this a way of trying to water it back up, so to speak?
This is sort of a bit in response to the restrictions that have been coming out in the last probably decade with respect to access to voting, surely.
You think those are national, or those are more statewide, and they're happening from state to state, different roadblocks being put in the way?
It's been state to state, but nationally the NAACP has been asking for these type of reforms on a national basis, with lobbying to Congress for certain reforms to sort of beef up, as you said, the Voting Rights Act, and also on a statewide basis to address certain things that individual states are doing to sort of roll back the voter access. And so, yes, it is in response, but I think this is also modernization of the process.
2 other key things in here. One is auditing. How are you going to control these audits? Because you talk about audits, but you don't go to specifics here.
Yeah, you wouldn't do specifics in a constitutional amendment. I mean, the audit process would have to be something the legislature or the Secretary of State would figure out, and the best practices around that are always changing. So, what this does is just ensure that there's a safety process to make sure that the integrity of our electoral systems are maintained. But one other thing I just wanted to add to what Kalila said is, the right to vote is not something that was just given to people in this country, right? When this country was first born and the Constitution first written, only white men with property had the right to vote. We have had to fight for the right to vote for the last 200 years, and unfortunately it's never a right that we've been able to keep. We've always had to protect it, and that's really one of the things we're trying to accomplish here too, is just to make sure that anybody who is entitled to vote can vote.
Straight party ticket, if this goes through, that would allow that to be able to happen. That is certainly something that's been challenged. It has certainly been a very partisan issue. Democrats like it, Republicans don't like it because it's city versus the outer areas. For those who look at this, they're going to say, this is just a liberal Democratic agenda here, and you're just trying to make it so that Democrats have more power than Republicans.
All of the reforms that we've tested, and the research that's been done on them show that they're widely supported by Republicans, Democrats, and independents. So, of course, some may want to make it into a partisan issue, but that's not really what it seems like the Michigan public believes.
All right. If you don't get the signatures, what's Plan B?
What's Plan B? There's no Plan B. We're going to get those signatures. We're always going to be talking about voting rights. We're always going to be making sure that we're taking complaints. We're always going to be monitoring what's going on with respect to access to the ballot. And so, you know, not to say that it's a plan B, but we're still going to be lobbying our legislators. We're still going to be asking for these reforms and asking that they stay also in touch with the population and what we want in terms of voting rights reform. And so, you know, we're not going to stop if we are successful, and we certainly plan on being successful, but we're still lobbying our legislators and making sure that they're aware of these reforms are needed and making sure that we're staying in touch with them as well.
All right, Kalia Spencer, Carrie Moss, thank you for coming in. It's called Promote the Vote, and it may be coming to a November, if I can say it, a November ballot to you. We'll find out in well, just a few months from now. And coming up, we'll talk to some people that are very interested in what the state fairgrounds will look like in the future. We'll be right back. Stay with us. And welcome back to Spotlight. Joining me now is Karen and Frank Hammer. They're with the State Fairgrounds Development Coalition, and we're pleased to have you on Spotlight today. Your first time on Spotlight.
Yes.
Indeed. All right, it won't be the last. I have a funny feeling. What is going to happen with the State Fairgrounds? I understand perhaps a major decision will be rendered on March the 21st by the Detroit Land Bank?
Perhaps. That's their goal. That's what they're working toward.
All right.
And
your concern is what? The coalition that you are a part of, and it's a very diverse coalition. I looked online, and you have people of all different backgrounds, all different professions, all different races, and I assume all different religions.
Well, what we want is, since we've been actively pursuing input from the community, just around the area, but also more broadly in the Tri-County area, we have distilled their comments and their suggestions into a vision that we hope will be adopted as a template for whatever developer develops the property.
Okay, you all are not, so let's be real clear for the viewers out there, you are not actually trying to develop it yourself. You do not have a proposal on the table that you're hoping they say yay or nay to. You're sort of looking out for that entire area, all the different communities, so that whatever decision is made, you hope it is in the best interest of the city of Detroit. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I think that's correct. And from day one, what we've been looking for is something that will be an economic driver for the city of Detroit and for the region, to make it a regional and even a world-class location that will be an attraction for people to come to Detroit. And the fairgrounds, historically, is the longest running state fair in U.S. history up till 2009. And the features of what it was, bringing together technology and agriculture and featuring that for the state of Michigan, we think going forward, it has incredible potential for being a destination for people to want to come to.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about, I remember way back when, development company Magic LLC, that Magic Johnson, the great basketball star and of course alumnus of Michigan State University, was involved in, I assume is still involved in, I think Marvin Beatty with the Greektown Casino was involved, and I assume there were others involved. That is one of the proposals, or perhaps the only proposal, that the Land Bank is going to be looking at and saying, I guess, either yes to or we don't like it and let's start from ground zero. Is that correct?
So the Michigan Land Bank and put out a request for proposals back in 2012. Magic Plus was one of just a small handful that were submitted.
They're the only ones still in the game right now.
They were selected.
Okay.
They were selected. They were granted the development rights. There was a purchase agreement, and the development agreement stipulated certain requirements that the Magic Plus would have to fulfill over the last few years.
But it hasn't been developed yet. And I can't speak for them, and I'm sure you probably can't either, but you may have more insight than me. I assume they've got reasons why perhaps it hasn't, whether it's lack of funding or roadblocks in their way, or they just didn't have their act together. I'm not sure what it is.
According to the development agreement, there was supposed to be shovels in the ground in spring of 2016.
Okay.
And what our understanding is that they have really not had the wherewithal to develop a huge tract of land. We're talking about 160 acres at Woodward and 8 Mile, south of the Myers Shopping Center.
That's a lot of land.
That's a lot of land, and it appears that they have not had the wherewithal or the investment in the project that they put forward. Now, the project that they put forward was basically a suburban-style shopping mall, big box shopping mall.
Right.
And we think that probably what's happened is that with shopping trends really changing across the land, that development that maybe does not look that attractive to investors in terms of what is good for Detroit, like 10, 20 years from now.
But it's still car-centric, and it's not very visionary in terms of embracing sustainability and technologies of the future, and marrying the diversity and the high density and the education and training of people as part of the development.
Okay. All right. We need to sneak a little break in here. When we come back, we'll pick up and talk about this a lot more. We'll be right back with Frank and Karen Hammer. Stay with us. Meta Expo. What exactly is that?
META, it stands for Michigan Energy, Technology, and Agriculture. These are the stanchions upon which both the past state fair and the future of Michigan are around, because it's what Michigan offers the world, especially the agriculture and technology. That's the strength in Michigan. And the expo part is what has happened in the past and should happen in the future to draw people to Michigan.
Do you all see the state fair ever coming back to that region? I mean, it's out there in Novi now, right?
We want to blend the state fair of the past with the state fair of the future, like a world fair.
Okay. And that would be an annual event?
Ongoing.
Ongoing.
And maybe with some annual specifics.
All right. How does transit fit into all of this? We've been talking about transit as long as I can remember, as long as I've been doing this show, for sure. But it's one of those key regional issues that everybody's trying to move forward on, but there are still roadblocks. But a part of your concern here is how transit may or may not fit into this?
Absolutely. So we think that the city is long overdue, as you do, in regards to regional transit. And our estimation is that the fairgrounds would serve as a transit center, as a multimodal hub, which brings together the rail line on the east side of the property with a rapid bus system using Woodward, and then the crosstown vehicles going along 8 Mile, that it becomes a natural place for a transit hub to exist.
How much conversation have you all had throughout this whole thing with Maurice Cox, who is Detroit's relatively new planning director, brought in by Mayor Mike Duggan?
We were happy to meet him almost at the point where he came to Detroit in June of 2015, and had several meetings with him in regards to the fairgrounds. And I think that between our vision and his ideas about the fairgrounds, I think there's a lot of overlap and a lot of togetherness on
I read somewhere that he, quote unquote, said that he thought that what you all were putting out there was visionary.
Yeah, so we had a public meeting in September of 2016, and it was on his behest, and he opened up the public meeting referring to our plan as being actually the more visionary that was out there. And we were very pleased that he took that attitude. We think that he brings a lot to the table. and we think that hopefully we'll have some working relationship going forward with what the fairgrounds is going to be. I think one of the things that's very important about the fairgrounds is the question of sustainability. We need to develop a more energy efficient construction, and the fairgrounds is the perfect place for it. We would like to reduce our carbon footprint, and the fairground site is a good place to try to do that.
Right. Karen, have you had any conversation, any contact with Mayor Duggan, and have any idea how he feels about all of this?
We have, actually before he was elected, we presented to him, and he said, come to me after the election. He has mainly dealt with us through Maurice Cox.
Okay.
Although we did, off of a public meeting we held in June of 2017, send a letter to him asking him to intervene to get the development going. So we expect that there would be a working relationship with the city should the city become more actively involved in this.
What's your best guess on what will happen on March the 21st?
So this is sheerly speculation.
Sure.
But we have been hearing through the grapevine that the city is interested in taking over the State Fairgrounds property for its development. We don't know that that's what's going to happen on March 21st, but we're understanding that that may be a possibility, and that may be a game changer. But we're not sure. All we know is that the Michigan Land Bank Authority has expressed exasperation about how long it's taken with the current selected developer, Magic Plus LLC.
All right. You all have had a good working relationship with Maurice Cox in the planning department, from your vantage point?
Yes.
He returns your calls, he returns your emails?
So when we had our public meeting mid last year, he made sure to send a representative. And by the way, Mayor Duggan also had Kim Tandy there, who's our District 2 manager. So I think we have, as good a working relationship with the city. We think it could be better, but I think the lines of communication are open, and I think that we'll continue to have some communication with them.
All right, next time you talk to him, maybe you could speculate as to why he hasn't returned our calls or our emails and our invitations to come on this program and talk about all that he's doing with the city planning department under his vision as the new director. The invitation certainly stands. We thank you so much for coming in and sharing this information, and we'll wait to see what happens on March the 21st. Should be interesting. All right, thank you very much.
So much.
Frank, thank you. Karen, thank you so much. And we want to thank you at home for joining us. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the spotlight. We hope you have a great week.